I'm going to ask us all to pause for a moment. As an educational institution, we recognize the importance of learning history and understanding the significance of the land our university is on. As a Catholic institution, we strive to uphold the dignity of every human being. Please share in the land acknowledgement with me. Inspired by Catholic intellectual tradition, we invite you to reflect on these scripture verses that offer us guidance in this endeavor.
Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But someone will say, "You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith." As a Catholic institution dedicated to the pursuit of truth, the University of St. Thomas recognizes that it occupies the ancestral and current homelands of the Dakota people, Minnesota Makoche. The University of St. Thomas community also recognizes the territory of the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk, whose lands were also colonized by the United States and are occupied by the state of Minnesota. As a country, we acknowledge the actions of our past, our present, and how these actions have developed systems of oppression rooted in settler colonialism that marginalized underrepresented peoples.
We condemn the acts of evil, including genocide and forced assimilation done in the name of white supremacy, and the continued oppression of indigenous peoples on the land that belongs to them. It is our mission to not only rectify these wrongs, but also provide an educational environment for our students, who as morally responsible leaders will continue to dismantle this legacy of violence and work to support and empower those who have been marginalized in our nation and the world. It is our goal to continue the process of decolonizing the mind and proactively integrating this process into our words and actions.
The Catholic Church and the University of St. Thomas teach that every person is born in the image and likeness of the Creator, and so has dignity and inalienable worth.
It is this belief that underlies all moral teaching regarding the intrinsic value of life, and which underlies the care for the person as the heart of Catholic education.
We are committed to the long, yet urgent work of truth-telling and relationship building, as we seek a way forward as relatives in the University of St. Thomas community, the Indigenous communities, and those who traverse multiple communities.
Welcome to our First Friday conversation. For more than 30 years, St. Thomas alumni and friends have come together for our First Friday Speaker Series luncheons to hear firsthand from the community's most interesting thought leaders. Now, we're delighted to share these conversations both online and in person. The leaders we invite to this series offer candid messages and unique perspectives on the common good, and provide interesting insights into what may be next for Minnesota and beyond. Today's guests certainly are no exception. We have Dr. Uhuru Williams, Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and Founding Director of the Racial Justice Initiative here at the University of St. Thomas. Dr. Williams received his PhD from Howard University in 1998. And is the author, editor, and co-editor of 8 books, in addition to numerous scholarly articles. He has appeared on a variety of local and national radio and television programs, and was featured in the Ken Burns PBS documentary, Jackie Robinson, the Stanley Nelson PBS documentary, The Black Panthers, and the History Channel docuseries, The Men Who Built America, Frontiersmen. Dr. Williams is an amazing force on our campus, and we're so pleased he's with us for today's conversation. He will be joined by Melvin Carter, the current mayor of St. Paul. Mayor Carter is a 4th-generation St. Paul resident who leads with an unapologetic equity agenda. Mayor Carter commonly recites his administration's mantra: building a city that works for us all means we all must do the work. Since taking office in 2018, Mayor Carter's accomplishments include raising the city's minimum wage, reestablishing an affordable housing trust fund, expanding immigrant and refugee support resources, and launching an Office of Financial Empowerment. A proud graduate of the St. Paul Public Schools, Mayor Carter holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Florida A&M University and a Master of Public Policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Mayor Carter, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate your leadership and you sharing your time and your insights with us today. Thank you all for joining us, and now please enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan, and welcome, Mayor Carter. So great to have you here with us today. First and foremost, congratulations on a campaign well run, and we are so happy and enthusiastic about your second term. So it seems appropriate, let's begin there. As you're thinking about the second term, what's your vision for St. Paul?
Well, thank you so much. And one, it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. It's always a pleasure to be here at the university. This is obviously a space that is growing and evolving fast and moving forward. So I appreciate the invitation. We're a city at a really intriguing point right now. Like the university here, St. Paul is growing fast. Our population is growing. We're near an all-time high population right now with 2 decades of projected growth in front of us. That is thousands more families living in our city, thousands more housing units that we need, more opportunity to get people around our city by car, transit, bike, or however they are getting around our city, thousands more students in our schools, thousands more people calling 911. And part of what I've been saying to our community is that it's pretty urgent that we start now redesigning our city to accommodate those folks so that we're not sort of playing catch up once those folks are already here. As we rebuild from the pandemic that we're still in right now, which is critical because we see a lot of folks sort of relaxing, and that's why we've seen the numbers ticking up like we have in Minnesota. As we rebuild, our focus really is on 3 things. It's on public safety and rethinking the way we approach public safety, not accepting the hyper-simplified solutions or the more of the same approaches that some folks would like us to fall for. It's around like housing and jobs, ensuring that we are both building the sort of macroeconomic opportunities that we need in our city, but then also the third piece is eliminating the disparities that we've faced for far too long. It's not just about having the amount of housing, it's about making sure that our families can be stably housed. It's not just about adding jobs to our city, it's about ensuring that families in every neighborhood can live with dignity. So those are the kind of core components of what I think the next chapter needs to look like in St. Paul.
You know, one of the reasons it's so fun to talk to you is that you always evidence this visionary reimagination. You talk about the urban landscape in ways that are exciting. You talk about the opportunity in St. Paul in ways that are exciting. One of the things that I thought was really impressive during your first term is you privileged education. You talked about child savings accounts, and then you did something that when people think about disparities, they don't think about the death by 1,000 cuts. You got rid of fees for library cards,
yes,
which is critical. Why is education so important to you? Why has this been such a cornerstone of your work?
You know, I ran for city council in 2006. I think I started a campaign for city council, and I was in my mid-late 20s, and all excited and energetic about light rail and jobs and economic development and housing and all the traditional kind of municipal issues. And families would ask me, what about education? And I would explain to them that our schools are run by the school district, which is a separate legal, fiduciary, and political organization, and give them their school board member's phone number, and their eyes would glaze over, and they'd walk away saying something very complimentary about me under their breath, I'm sure. And then a couple of things happened. As we dug deeply into saying, how do we add jobs in this community? How do we build wealth in this community? How do we ensure financial success and that families can live with dignity in our community? How do we build a real approach to public safety in our community? All roads led to education. All roads led to the fact that as a city council member, I represented a neighborhood that had a 10% college graduation rate. And that if we can figure out how to do a better job preparing our young people and our adults for the future, that all of those other challenges that are downstream will be fundamentally different for us. In the wake of all of that, my oldest daughter turned the age where it was time to pick a kindergarten. And I remember feeling like the only thing I know for a fact about this decision is my great-grandkids are counting on me to make the right decision, right? That it's going to impact their lives. And it really felt like a punch in the stomach to realize that I've been telling these families who were trying to tell me that they were feeling that pain, who were trying to tell me they were feeling that deep stress and anxiety in their own lives, that I've been telling them very specifically that I'm not going to do anything about it, and you go call somebody else. And so that's when we started building the St. Paul Promise neighborhood, which we built when I was on the city council. And that's why saying like all of our roads, because in the end, I don't know what we could do as a community that's more important, more urgent, or should be a higher priority than preparing our young people to succeed in the future. I don't know what it would be that should be higher up on our list. But what we find is that folks always ask me, because I promised neighborhood, and then I went to the governor's office and served as executive director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet. And one question I always get is, what's one thing we can do? Like, what is one thing we can do to help low-income children, to help Black and brown children, to help children in our community that could like change the game for children in our community? And I've become convinced that the one thing we could do is stop looking for one thing we can do. I have children, and my question is never like, what's the one thing that I can do to help my child? The question is, what is everything under the sun that we can imagine to do to help improve the outcomes and to help improve the prospects for our children individually? So the journey that we're trying to take as a city is, what if we thought that way around all of the 5,000 children who are born in our city this year? That's why college savings accounts are important. We're the first city in America to launch a college savings accounts initiative. We put $50 in the bank to start every child in our city on the pathway to college from birth, that features automatic universal enrollment right at birth. And ultimately, all that means is if you have a baby in St. Paul and you don't want your child to have a college savings account, well, there's paperwork to fill out, because this is about all of our children. You mentioned the late fines, the library late fines, and it's a really intriguing, because it's not really that big of a change in the context of the city's kind of budget. It was about a $215,000 budget item. It's not really that big of a change, but it's an enormous change in sort of changing the lens of like what we expect our library to be in our community. When I became elected mayor, we had somewhere around 50,000 St. Paul residents whose lending privileges in our libraries were revoked for as little as $10 in late fines dating back 10 years, which is insane. I mean, all the accounting majors, who have taken the course on allowance for doubtful accounts would tell you $10 from 10 years ago isn't real money anyways. And so I tell folks, like, look, it was a hard decision to make until we realized we actually want children to read. It's one of these things where people ask me, like, what if this policy fails? And my response is, kids will have books. Like, I don't know what you even mean by failing. And what we saw is, in literally the first quarter of this new policy, we saw library use in all of our lowest income neighborhoods in St. Paul increase by double digits. Our families got it. They took us up on that pledge, and they returned to our libraries. We all know, if we ask all the folks watching us right now, when you think of, when you think of libraries, what do you think of? We go to late fees, and we go to the stress around late fees. And one of the reasons we did that is because we've always thought that late fees make people bring back their library book. But in truth, late fees make people stay away from the library. And so in clearing that, we allow people to be welcomed back into their library. But more important, I think it's a treatise on the need for real public engagement and the need for real participatory governance. That's such an obvious change. Libraries, since the beginning of time, have been the icon of free access to information. And what we're saying is, we don't want to create an economic test that bars some families from that. It's such an obvious change that we made. Here's why we haven't made it before then, though. We have families in our city for whom a $10 late fine is a minor inconvenience. And we have families in our city for whom $10 is dinner for their children. And governments are typically occupied, the seats of decision-making power the seats of economic power, are typically occupied by those for whom $10 is a minor inconvenience. And if the folks for whom $10 is a major thing, is dinner for their children, a piece of the rent, a bed tonight, if those folks never get an opportunity to be a part of the decision-making process, a part of the policy-making process, then we'll never even know that a decision that relatively minor can make such an enormous difference. And so we're excited about that. We're really proud of that. But also we're really excited about all the other ways we can look at City Hall through that kind of lens.
I think that's a great indication of the visionary reimagination that people get when they're exposed to you. And I think we're very fortunate to be living in the city of St. Paul with a mayor who's really put this city on the map. It's exciting to watch national programs and see your mayor representing progressive ideas. And the same way that the university is trying to make this jump to.
Well, let me say, before you go, I have to say this. I appreciate it, but these aren't my ideas, right? They're like our goal, like the secret sauce of what we're trying to do is literally just open up the doors. That idea came from frontline library users and frontline library staff who came to me and said, "Hey, think about this," and they made so much difference. We did it. The point of all of this is, I can't think of that from my office, right? Like I can't think of that from my corner office in City Hall. Like building a city that works for all of us really means we all have to do a part of the work. So I appreciate what you just said, but the point of all of this is these aren't my ideas. The whole point is engaging people and pulling people into the process to say, you tell me what your library needs to be. You tell me what your block needs to be. You tell me how we make your block safer. You tell me how we build economic power and empowerment and opportunity for your family. And let's go down these roads together.
It's a great model of servant leadership and also being engaged and hearing what community's sharing. Here at the university, of course, we launched Doherty Family College to meet that need. We thought about a college of health because we recognize that particularly in communities of color, social determinants of health are major problems. So we want to reimagine that. But I want to ask you something specific, something I've been, again, just impressed with the way that you've tackled this. The last year has been unprecedented. Murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the global pandemic, exacerbating all the questions and issues that you've raised about housing, education. As you think about tackling this forward, what as a community do we need to be thinking about in terms of surviving this and coming out on the other side as that vibrant community that you messaged on the campaign trail?
It's a good question, and the shortest answer is I don't know, right? We have to do this together. One of the things that I think is the hardest thing for me to grapple with over everything that's happened in the last year and a half or so is this realization that I don't actually think that anything that happened in 2020 was new. In 2020, we saw a significant number of Americans whose lives were impacted by a health event that they didn't have access to the resources or the care to be able to get beyond. We saw people who completely saw their housing, their employment, their business, their economic reality shattered through no fault of their own. We experienced in St. Paul, a city of just over 300,000 people, 90,000 applications for unemployment insurance. And keep in mind, that's not 300,000 working age adults. That's 300,000 people. That includes all the students here. That includes my 1.5-year-old. And so 90,000 applications for unemployment is staggering. We saw the number of individuals who experience unsheltered homelessness in our city jump tenfold in a matter of weeks. In summer of 2019, we were tracking, I believe, 29 people living in tents in our city. Summer of 2020, that number jumped over 380. But all of these things we've seen before. We saw an unarmed African-American man killed at the hands of a police officer. We've seen that before. The most hurtful thing about the murder of George Floyd is how historically unsurprising it is. And so I joke with folks that most of what's happened over the last couple of years just wasn't on the brochure when I signed up to run for mayor. But the truth is, we've had the warning signs out there for a really long time. So we can talk about what we didn't know, but what we did know is that we've got a city of great opportunity. We've got a city of great prosperity. We've got a city that people flock to from around the state, around the country, literally from around the world to find prosperity, to educate their children, to build whatever their next steps of their life or their business is going to be. And we also know that we've got a city of enormous, embarrassing, pervasive disparities. We've got a city where there are folks who sort of live in the penthouse, and there are folks who feel like they're living in the shadows of these tall buildings that we're building. And when we saw the enormous rage around the murder of George Floyd, I think it's important for us to note that it's more than just about police violence. It's that people look at this officer who is paid by our public coin to protect and serve us, inflicting harm. And that's the same pain that we feel when we see a freeway that's supposed to create economic development, but that gutted my family inheritance. It's the same pain that we feel when we see record stock market returns at the same time as record unemployment in our communities. It's the same pain that we feel when we see like shiny new kind of apartment buildings being built and condos being built while we're struggling to kind of make the rent at the end of the month. And so this is why all of what we have to do is centers around this banner that we always raise, that's building a city that works for all of us. And in order to do that, we have to get over the prerequisite understanding that our systems, that our policies, that our programs, that the government that we operate, that we're very used to, not only doesn't always work for all of us, but there are those of us, and particularly in Black and brown communities, who look at all these systems and feel constantly like they represent a knee on our neck. Right now, as we sit here, we are waiting for the verdict in 2 trials. We're waiting to find out if our legal system can say that you can't borrow an automatic rifle, show up in a neighborhood that's not yours, create a conflict, shoot 3 people, and then get off clean and call it self-defense. We're waiting to see if our legal system can say, you can't chase somebody down the street and then shoot him because you don't like where he's jogging and say it was self-defense. You can't do that. And I think we have people who get frustrated when they see a protest. That's inconvenient. And that's disruptive. You're not helping your own cause when you do that. But I think what we miss is that we're talking to people who are waiting to find out if our lives can be taken with impunity still, or if there's some ability some systemic ability in our country yet to be able to protect us from those things. And the urgency that creates when we have whole segments of our country, whole segments of our community right here in Minnesota. And I'll say, there's just no excuse for Minnesota being an exporter of hashtags in the way that we've been over the past 10 years. There's no excuse for it. We ought to be the example. We ought to be exporting the model. We ought to be exporting the example. We're the North Star state. That ought to mean something in our community. And I say that all to say is, again, what we're doing right now is saying we need a new approach to public safety, one that doesn't center around kind of old Clint Eastwood style, kind of chase the good guys out of town, the bad guys out of town before sundown. We need a new model of economic development that isn't just saying we're going to build the sort of macro pie and hope sort of it works itself out, but that we're going to build economic opportunity very intentionally in ways that is inclusive. And we're definitely focused on housing because we have a housing crisis in our community. That said, what I think is at least as important as what we're doing is how we're doing it. Our commitment to equity has to be at the core. And I'll tell you, one of the interesting things, my first year as mayor, my communications director came in my office one day and said, "Mayor, do you want fireworks on the 4th of July?" And I said, "Yes, I love the fireworks." And he said, "Well, it's going to cost us $100,000. And I said, "Well, no, what's next?" And just a couple weeks later, coincidentally, we were able to find $100,000 to launch a legal defense fund for immigrants and refugees who were being targeted by the Trump administration at the time. A friend of mine who's been in progressive politics with me for decades looked at me and said, but isn't it an equity thing? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, black children and white children and rich children and poor children and children in every neighborhood can sort of look up and see the fireworks all the same. And it was mind-blowing for me because it was a reminder that we need a driving definition of what we mean by equity. And oftentimes, even those of us who, carry the banner, forget what it is that we're carrying, what it is that, what does that mean? What's our operational definition of what we're doing? My undergraduate degree is in business administration. And when my dean said equity, when my business school dean said equity, it was not at all amorphous what she meant. She was talking about a money word. She was talking about ownership. She was talking about decision-making power. And she was talking about participation in an economy. If I own equity in a company and that company has a good quarter, then I have a pretty good quarter too. And that's the operational definition of equity that we're building towards in St. Paul. It's ensuring that every family in every part of our city knows that they are owners of our community. You literally pay the rent in City Hall. It's ensuring that every family, every member, every resident in every neighborhood knows that they are welcome to be a part of our decision-making processes. Every member of my cabinet has been appointed through our community-based hiring process. Every budget I've sent to the city council has been developed through our community-based budgeting process. We're the only city that I know of on the planet that said, wait a minute, we're going to completely rewrite our use of force policies that govern our police department, but we can't just disappear in the police station and write a use of force policy. This is a covenant between our officers and our community members, and it has to be developed together through a 2-month, two-way kind of dialogue and conversation. So all that to say is, everything that we're doing is to drive towards this definition of equity, and that final piece is absolutely critical. It's about participation in an economy. That's why we raise the minimum wage. That's why college savings accounts are important. That's why our Office of Financial Empowerment that we created is important. That's why the guaranteed income trial that we started last year, we're taking a cohort of low-income families with very young children and providing a $500 monthly benefit, unconditional benefit, to just help them get to the end of the month every month. That's why that's important. And we're having a big conversation about rent stabilization right now. And the reason we have to have this conversation is because a majority of St. Paul voters came forward and said, wait a minute, I see us building a whole lot of buildings, but I also see us having a heck of a time paying the rent and kind of getting to the end of the month. And if we're going to create the amount of opportunity that we are, if we're going to create the amount of prosperity that we are, right now St. Paul probably has more opportunity for just ground up urban redevelopment than any large city in America. And if we're gonna build the type of wealth that we are in our community, then we ought to also make sure that we spend some particular energy making sure that our families on the east side and in Frogtown and in Dayton's Bluff and on the west side, that all of our families can live with stability and dignity in our community. I don't even know if I answered the question you asked me, but that's what I think is next.
I could say amen. What I love about your answer in a way, Mayor Carter, is you talked about the wound that your family experienced with regard to Rondo. A lot of people want to jump immediately to the healing. They don't want to do the hard work or the historical recovery or dealing with the issues in the moment to really be in a space to understand. You have to redress some of that. You have to think differently about that. As you think about Rondo in particular, why is simple acknowledgement not enough? Why do we have to, in some sense, think about that also being part of the equity piece that you talked about? What we call all for the common good, what you said is making the city work together for all of us. Mm-hmm. Why is that historical recovery so important to that?
I had a friend ask me that recently, and he goes, that was 50 years ago. That was so long ago. Slavery was 400 years ago. Let's start where we are now and move forward. I said, well, that sounds well and good. But I imagine if you were a millionaire today and your family made your money because your great-grandfather stole $1 million from my great-grandfather, you might not be done with the conversation. And the reason it's important is because we still have wounds. You can say that was 50 years ago, that was 60 years ago. What that means for me is that was less than a generation ago. What that means for me is I grew up. Every time we'd be on I-94, we'd drive right around under the Dale Street Bridge, and my dad would say, "You're in my bedroom right now." And I grew up hearing my father tell the stories of not only having his family uprooted from their family home against their will, not only having them, receive pennies on the dollar, not only on the family home. My grandparents owned over half a dozen commercial properties on Old Rondo that were uprooted to build the freeway. But to hear my father tell the stories about watching his parents' home, watching his family home that they had been moved out of, burned down by the St. Paul Fire Department as a training exercise. The level of generational trauma that still exists today is enormous. As we say, oh, we're going to build light rail on University Avenue, as we say, we're going to build a soccer stadium, as we say, we're going to build, we hear the voices of the elders in our community who look up and say, oh, yeah, big multi-million-dollar development that's going to benefit everybody, huh? No thanks. We've been there, done that. As we engage a pandemic, we can't have a conversation about vaccines in our community without having a discussion about the Tuskegee experiment. We can't have a conversation about vaccines in the Native community without having a discussion about smallpox blankets. And so we can pretend these wounds are old, but here's the thing, if you don't heal a wound, well, it actually doesn't just stay there, it gets worse, it festers. And it manifests in physical, mental, emotional, spiritual ways. And that's what's happened over a period of time. We created hardship. We created trauma. We gutted people's family inheritance to the tune of, I saw a study recently that suggested just the wealth that was stolen on Old Rondo to build the freeway in today's dollars is north of $90 million. What's, I think, most important to know about that number is that's just St. Paul. That story happened in Boston and in Detroit and in Oakland and literally everywhere across our country. And St. Paul's number is $90 million. So if you think about the staggering, breathtaking transference of wealth that occurred through the interstate movement, well, of course, that still plays out today. I don't think that it's a mistake that before I-94 went through our community, we had a thriving, prospering African-American community. And today, we look at that community and say, wow, 10% college graduation rates and deep levels of poverty and public safety challenges and all of the things that the litany of challenges that we rehearse on a day-to-day basis. It's not a coincidence. And it won't resolve itself by coincidence either. It's going to have to be, I tell folks with regard to the pandemic, as far as a pandemic response is concerned, the pandemic is a crisis that's bigger, that's more devastating, and that's longer sustained than anything you or I would have predicted or even imagined 2 years ago. And so if we're going to say we're going to build a response to the pandemic, it's going to have to be bigger, it's going to have to be more helpful, and it's going to have to be more longer sustained than anything we would have imagined 2 years ago. The same is true with the uprooting of Rondo. The same is true with these historic hardships, these historic wrongs that we've committed. They've been done through countless hours of work, through millions of dollars of investment, through a significant process and time and deliberate engagement. And to suggest that those things can be undone, the harm that was created can be undone with anything short of significant intentionality, of significant office hours and millions of dollars of investment and heavy engagement is to just break from reality.
I love the language of significant intentionality, like this idea that this isn't going to be happenstance that we move into. I got to tell you something else that it's kind of interesting. I think it resonates with people about you. You talk about some heavy issues. You've tackled some heavy issues. You've got this great resume of things that we've accomplished, and I'll adopt that from you as a city in the last over your term. And yet, there's perhaps no one more hopeful and no one more optimistic who projects a sense that we're a city on the rise. Where's that come from? Where's that fire come from?
Oh, I get to see people all the time. So we've had a really, really hard last 2 years. But the flip side of that coin is just amazing. And I get to see it in ways that not everybody else does, right? When the pandemic hit and we had to close bars and restaurants, everybody saw the headlines about how hard it was on our bars and restaurants. My phone rang the next day, and it was one of our biggest kind of restaurateurs in the city. And I looked and I went, oh man, he's gonna give me an earful. I picked up the phone and he said, hey, I got all this food. How do I get it to families in need? How do I get it to people who are hungry? The morning after that horrible night of destruction that we saw in civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd, everybody covered, the national media, the global media covered the destruction. They turned off their cameras just in time to miss the people who came out of nowhere with shovels and brooms and paintbrushes and rags to just help each other. They missed the business owner that I talked to that next morning, whose business was literally burned to the ground, was a complete loss. And she looked at me and she said, listen, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. And I said, I know, I'm sorry, and we'll be here with you as you rebuild. And she said, oh no, I'm sorry. I was just saying I can help. If there's an effort coming together, I can help. And it just bodes so well for this community to have a city full of people, business owners, business leaders, residents, students, who can be in crisis. And at the same time as they're in personal crisis, economic crisis, their businesses in crisis, that they can be focused on how they can help each other. That's exciting. And it's hard not to be hopeful where that's concerned. And it ties into what our strategy is right now. And that is this. I've realized, actually in the process of talking about the story of the last 4 years in running for re-election, I realize what we're doing. I actually realize what we're doing. And that is this. I'm convinced that we've inherited a corrupt model of city building. In that it centers around really two things. It's one, a public safety strategy that, like I said, I think is borrowed from the Wild Wild West. That's about searching our town for the bad people and getting them out. And two, an economic development strategy that's the opposite. It's, going and looking in Wisconsin and Minneapolis and Houston for promise and prosperity and potential, and trying to figure out how to lure them here. We're constantly looking for problems internally and potential externally. And that orientation to our city leads us to a city building strategy that always bets against ourselves. And that's what I think makes people angry. So our goal is to say, and I get to see people all day. I get to just be in all of our different neighborhoods. I get to ask business leaders, like, why are you putting your business in St. Paul? Today I'm going to have dinner with a business that wants to launch a really big concept in St. Paul. And it's exciting to always be able to just see the dreams that our residents have planted in our community. And I believe that when we bet on us, that's what college savings are about. That's what guaranteed income is about. That's what eliminating late fines and raising the minimum wage and even rent stabilization is about. It's like, what happens if we just adopt this old model of betting against ourselves in favor of a model of city building that literally every day says, how do we find another way to just bet on us, to bet on us, to bet on us? And I just know enough people in this community. I get to spend enough time with students, with families, with parents, with business leaders in our community to just be really excited about the future that lies ahead of St. Paul if we keep on betting on us like that.
So I got to ask you this just for fun, for the Tommy Nation.
Right.
One thing people don't know about you, you'd like people to know.
Oh, one thing people don't know about me. I don't know. I didn't have. I didn't prepare for that question. Let's see. One thing people don't know about me. The pandemic has helped me. I think people know that I ran the marathon. It was in the news and stuff like that. The pandemic has taught me one important thing, and that is this. We have a 1.5-year-old at home, and I've learned that I can put my phone on, mounted to the handlebars of my jogging stroller, and I can have a cabinet meeting while running the river or while running Summit Avenue or while running. So I am almost constantly running past Tommy's as they're getting on the city bus or as they're walking to the parking ramp or something like that. I'm almost constantly running up Summit past them, either with a stroller or by myself. And almost every time I do it, I'm actually in a meeting I'm in a Zoom meeting, bobbing up and down. I think my staff loves it when I do that.
That's great. And I got to ask you this for Tommy Nation too. We're going D1.
Yes.
We obviously have a new College of Health coming online. we've been your partners in this, and I think Julie Sullivan reminds me very much every day with her visionary leadership why vision is so important. Let me ask you this question for everyone. When we're thinking about, as individuals taking action, I know you hear this a lot, people want to know what they can do, and you spoke to it earlier. You've been very clear. It's not one thing. It's a mindset. Can you talk a little about and unpack that mindset for people? What does it mean to be in a place where you're just thinking about making our community work for everyone?
I don't know. I do know. What we have experienced, my grandfather used to always say, if experience won't teach you, then nothing will. And we've heard voices who have tried to tell us for a really long time. Martin Luther King once said, we all live in this inescapable web of mutuality wherein what impacts one directly impacts all indirectly. We celebrate our former late U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone, who said, we all do better when we all do better. And we have a governor right now who just says, we're all part of one Minnesota, right? We got to do this together. And ultimately what I pray is that the experience we've faced over the last 2 years has finally shown us, without a shadow of a doubt, that as long as there's one community member in our city, as long as there's one resident of our city who can't afford a stable home when it's time to shelter in place, who can't afford to take a week off of work when it's time to quarantine or care for a sick child, who can't afford to go straight to the doctor when they feel like they have symptoms, that we're all worse off. And I'm not asking you to help me for my benefit. I'm asking you to help me because if you don't, you'll be worse off. And I think it's about taking an honest look at the ways in which we're all interconnected. The pandemic, I pray, has stripped us of some of the false sense of security that can make me feel like you can suffer in trauma while I just go about my everyday life just fine. We haven't been able to do that. We've been stripped of that. And what I pray is, as more and more of us get the vaccine, as more and more of us get the booster, as our COVID infection rates go down and our hospitalization rates go down, and we start to say, what does it look like outside the other side of this thing? That we don't suffer the amnesia that we've suffered from after all of our other minor ailments that sort of bring us together for a time, and then we sort of forget and go back to our regularly scheduled program. But that we remember the extent to which we found out this year, that we found out these past couple of years, just how connected we are. Just how connected my children are to your parents. You know what I mean? Just how connected the human experience is, not just in St. Paul, but literally across the globe. And one of the reasons I wanted to be here today is because I learned that in college. I learned that as a student at Florida A&M University when we went through a series of so I went to college at one of the largest historically black colleges in the country. I was there during election 2000. Folks remember hanging chads and those types of things. I was there for a period in time in which someone set off a series of pipe bombings on our campus, and the FBI occupied our campus. We had to wear our student ID badges around our neck, or you would be questioned by the FBI. And we were there during this it almost felt like a civil rights immersion experience. We thought we were there. I thought I was there to study business and go be somebody's CEO and look out for myself and my family. And we had this experience that rooted us and connected me, made me feel connected more so than ever before in my life to those stories I read about the civil rights era and the folks who marched and rode buses and protested and kind of existed and all of those types of things. So I found my voice. I found my need to kind of be involved in the world in college, and we need the brilliant Tommy Nation watching this video. We need them doing the same thing. This is your city. This is your community, and wherever you lived before you enrolled at St. Thomas, this is your city now. And I tell folks all the time, if you don't speak up, your voice won't be heard. That's just the basic rule. If you don't speak up, your voice won't be heard. And I don't know if you've ever had a mayor invite you to say, come be a part of our budget process, or come be a part of helping us figure out who our cabinet members should be who help run our city and those types of things. But if you have ambitions for your world, if we're not meeting right now as a city, as a state, as a country, as a world, if we're not meeting as a world, the ambition that you have for who our community should be, then it's because you haven't chimed in and helped us meet it yet. And that's what we're inviting our whole community to. That's what I want to invite kind of Tommy Nation to. And I think it's really, really powerful, in particular, when young people stand up. One thing I can guarantee you about the entire trajectory of, especially our country, if not the world, is that you look at all the cool moments, you look at all the cataclysmic moments in which we expanded human rights, or expanded our ability to connect with people, or expanded the quality of life that our children can achieve, and none of them will be possible without young people. None of them will be possible without college students. And so the reason I like to spend time on campuses is because I fear that there are brilliant students right here on campus who are waiting until after the semester's over, or waiting until after they graduate, or waiting until after they get a job, or waiting until after they get married, or buy a house or start a family, to start changing the world. And if you wait, the world won't change.
Mayor Carter, it is always a pleasure to be in your company, always to feel the electricity. Congratulations again on your victory, and I'm so excited for your next term. And we will be working with you,
yes, sir.
Tommy Nation. So thank you again
we
for
will
joining
together.
us. Appreciate you. And I'd like to just say, in addition to thank you to Mayor Carter, thank you to all of you, and share a few opportunities coming up that you can join us for as the holidays are upon us. There are several events and ways to engage during the holiday season. All are listed on our alumni website, which is alumni.stthomas.edu. Of course, a favorite is the traditional St. Thomas Alumni Christmas Luncheon, which will be held Friday, December 3rd, and it will be held at the Intercontinental Hotel in downtown St. Paul, and you can register on the website. First Friday will also be back in February, when we'll hear from Hennepin Healthcare CEO Jennifer DeCubelis and Allina Health CEO Penny Wheeler. Enjoy the rest of your day, and again, thank you for joining us. Mayor Carter, always fantastic.
Thanks for having me.